Twilight Princess. From its very first announcement at E3 2004, with Miyamoto standing sword and shield in hand to a roaring audience, Twilight Princess was one of many historic hype cycles in the industry, and being 10 years old helped as well. But honestly, I didn't even know I could be as excited as I was for a new game as I was with Twilight Princess. At the time, we just got through Wind Waker, which is regarded as a masterpiece today, but many people wanted to have a gritty and more realistic take on Zelda. And that's exactly what was going on here. At the time, my family was pretty firmly set into the Nintendo camp, so PlayStation, Xbox were pretty much settled only at friends' houses. Of course, growing up with those old Nintendo systems meant we would end up getting a subscription to Nintendo Power for a few years. So every month from about 2005 to 2006, one of these guys would show up and give us lots of new information on the newest Nintendo games. Many of those games I'd probably never even play, but I was like 10, so... Still, these magazines would give me so much cool stuff to read about, from developer interviews to new screenshots about upcoming games, and also, of course, those awesome posters. I think that things really lined up for me here because we were subscribed to Nintendo Power from about 2005 to 2006, which was the peak of the Zelda hype cycle. During that time, nearly every month you would get a little bit more of a peek at the Legend of Zelda working title. While I didn't exclusively get all my gaming information from Nintendo Power at the time, most of it was, because you gotta remember internet access just wasn't the same back then. It was really the last stretch of playground rumors and magazines. So I hope you'll join me as we take a look through Twilight Princess's hype cycle, development, and the way Nintendo Power was covering it through the years. Despite E3 happening in May, Nintendo Power wouldn't really cover it until July the next month. Outlets like IGN were on the ball, but in the June 04 issue, they did report Eiji Aonuma making mention of Wind Waker 2 at Game Developers Conference earlier that year. But other than that easy to miss blurb, not much was said. Nintendo Power would end up covering E3 in their July issue 181, but for some reason Zelda isn't included yet. They focused the piece on upcoming games instead of longer-term projects, and didn't mention Zelda at all. But hey, I learned that Mega Man Anniversary Collection was supposed to be on Game Boy. I've never seen that before. In issue 182, Nintendo Power finally placed The Legend of Zelda working title on its Game Watch section. The issue detailed the E3 experience and how Zelda was first shown off. While younger guys like myself didn't really have access to the iconic moment on video, there were still a few photos of the event and a general release date for 2005. I also really like how they refer to Link here as Adult Link, which is a term we've kind of gotten further away from as we've gotten farther from Ocarina of Time. Obviously, Link is just a general teenager, but a lot of people back then in 04 saw Twilight Princess Link as the mature, grown-up version they always wanted, almost like a sequel to Ocarina of Time. It might have been a bit of projection here, since in the final game, he's pretty much still just a teenager. They also mentioned that the Nintendo website was updated with some images of the new Zelda game, and it's something that I probably looked into at the time, but I can't really remember. I just know that I used to go on those websites every once in a while. From here on, things would be pretty quiet. Zelda would sit in the Game Watch section, and the occasional Zelda fan art would pop up. Things were pretty focused on the brand new DS, and the last solid wave of GameCube games like Prime 2. Nintendo Power readers were asked in issue 187 to highlight some other games that might have got lost behind the Zelda hype, with responses including Custom Robo and Beyond Good and Evil, but the wait continued. The second half of the 180 issues were where I remember getting most into Nintendo Power. I might have had a few straggler issues from before this, but issue 188 featured a lot of things that I distinctly remember. 188 featured a list of the most anticipated games coming out on the then three pillars, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, and DS. Zelda finally shows up at the end of the block here, and they emphasize the scope and maturity of the new game. Issue 190 was probably the first time I felt that the GameCube was really starting to wind down. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance would make an appearance in the news section, but it was pretty clear that, even by their phrasing, time was running out for the Cube. The Cube and Zelda needed a lot more time.
I have crossed into the other side. Oh my gosh, no. It is Nintendo.
But he has never changed his nature. Today, prepare to see Link as you've never seen him before.
By issue 191, Zelda was right around the corner, or on the corner. After 9 months of nothing, Nintendo Power would finally deliver the goods with some new screenshots and an awesome poster that I immediately had up on the wall back in the day. The editors knew what people wanted and even directed people to Zelda.com to watch the newest trailer. But man, I remember looking at that poster with these dozen or so screenshots, just thinking of all the possibilities. There's these skeleton dogs and this one golem looking guy in the forest. It all looked like it was going to be massive. Looking back at it now, I think only like 2 images here actually made it to the final game. Issue 192 would really begin the proper news cycle for Zelda. Iwata showed off an upcoming trailer to a limited viewing at GDC, among other things like the Wii, which was known as the Revolution at the time. Assuming the cut was an early version of the one for E3, that would mean those guys got to see the trailer a good few months early. But here we are with the first edition of Inside Zelda, titled The Vision Guy. In this issue, Aonuma talks about his experience working on earlier Zelda games and the reception people had to the new realistic look. There's a clear sense of indecision about making another large-scale Zelda, and he also goes into being talked into it by Miyamoto. Inside Zelda would honestly become one of my favorite parts of Nintendo Power in the months to come, and it would offer these really humanistic interviews one-on-one with people directly responsible with different aspects of the game. Based on the screenshots in the article, you get an idea that Zelda was not that far along yet, especially when you consider how much longer it would be from now and how much stuff would get cut. Another July brought another huge wave of E3 and Zelda news, and this awesome artwork that would end up being the final look of the cover art in the West. You know, Japanese box art is usually cooler, but this is the rare occurrence where I think the North American one is way better. I guess it makes sense for a Zelda game that was directly made for Western audiences, though. This issue also happened to be during a bit of a rebranding for Nintendo Power. There's a general aesthetic shift with a new logo and page design. In a lot of ways, this is the Nintendo Power that I really knew growing up, with these little jokes on these yellow bars every once in a while, and more of a focus on previews. A new look came with a much more highlighted Most Wanted section, which had Zelda in the top 5 since about issue 185 back in November. It would pretty much stay like this until Zelda launched. Issue 193 would feature an entire 12-page segment with both an E3 update and an Inside Zelda. Link in a New Light goes into the ways the new Zelda game would age things up. The Ordon village name hasn't been translated yet, and it still goes by Towaru, but the Forest Temple is nearly done by the looks of it. I also noticed this one section with Link in his village clothes during nighttime, which I don't think is possible in the final game. Something I wish stuck around in the final version was the black and white look for the Twilight Realm. These images still look striking, and I love the way they make Midna's hair stand out so much. I also like how they acknowledge the fans that didn't like the Wind Waker art style, saying that the colors have literally been banished here. The Inside Zelda segment follows Satoru Takizawa, the art director for Twilight Princess. Takizawa was responsible for a lot of creatures in Mario 64, but it's pretty cool to know that he was responsible for Ganondorf's design in Ocarina. I love this section at the end where he talks about his family and the work that he and Aonuma had to do to get Twilight Princess out of the door. There's also this fun little mock-up box at the end for a chance to get the game early or something. All the Zelda games before Twilight Princess had a solid gold cover art, so it was pretty reasonable to assume they would just do it again. In August the next month, Nintendo Power would come with a little surprise. This was the post-E3 special, which came bundled with a special DVD with Link's face slapped on the cover. There's some interesting segments here, another look at StarCraft Ghost right before it was gone, and the Revolution announcement. In general, it was a pretty exciting time for the industry, but we're here for Zelda. There's another fantastic poster for Twilight Princess, definitely on the wall. Apparently, Zelda's black robe is inspired by Japanese funeral cloaks. I don't think I've ever heard that before. Their E3 coverage goes into the Twilight Princess booth with these awesome statues and sets. The lines for Zelda were almost 4 hours long though, and people would do it just to try out that demo. There's video footage of the booth with lots of cool puppetry with the wolf and a guy in a full Link costume. The next few pages go over the full demo that was at the booth. There's a segment of the Orly Ordon village and Forest Temple, where you can see that R was still being used in the HUD, and there's no Z button. The Forest Temple seems almost identical to the final game, save for a slightly different Gale Boomerang. I never got to see all this footage back then, and I had to go with just these photos and descriptions at the time. I'm not really sure if it was inaccessible per se, but I just wouldn't know how to get to it. Back then, I think your best bet was catching something like G4. What you can't easily find anymore, though, are people's impressions like in this column here. The emphasis on story with these guys is really interesting, since I think Twilight Princess can be criticized nowadays for its long introduction. But either way, these guys really embodied how everyone felt at the time. Of course, the best part of the issue was that DVD with Twilight Princess as its big draw. I still have my old copy, and I think it might be the only thing I have left from my original Nintendo Power collection. My new copy of the magazine actually still has the disc inside. That's gonna stay that way. I did rewatch these for a video last year, but that trailer is still truly fantastic. I still have the song stuck in my head, and I've probably watched it dozens of times. Thinking about it now, it seems like a lot of the stuff past the forest wasn't even close to ready, at least for E3, since the Forest Temple and Hyrule Field are the only things they show here. But still, it's a fantastic trailer that gave us the Twilight Princess subtitle and really delivered the scope and tone of the game. We fear having to come up with something new here to say every month. Oh, would you look at that, we're out of space. By September 2005, I think Zelda was on the most wanted chart for almost a year. This issue's coverage would become pretty standard for the next few months. With E3 long gone, they instead focused on some of the details that people might have missed in the demo. The Inside Zelda here would focus on Koji Kondo, but you probably already know who that is. He goes into his musical background and how he wanted to use an orchestra for Twilight Princess, but that wouldn't really happen until Skyward Sword years from now. I'm not going to cover all of them super in depth, but I can't overstate how great these articles were. Getting to understand the people behind the game like this, and in a way that has these odd moments of humanity, is really special, and I think that the magazine format actually worked well here to make it much more quiet and personal. This is probably one of the earliest places where I was introduced to people who actually make the games I was playing. Learning about the influences they took for each game or where they came from is really fascinating stuff. Nintendo Power is pretty easy to find online now, so I'd recommend reading these Inside Zelda segments. This issue is pretty short for Zelda content in general, but the Inside Zelda is probably one I remember the most. This one interviews Satomi Asakawa, a designer that worked on a bunch of Zelda NPCs like the owl in Ocarina of Time. Her work stretches through a bunch of classic Nintendo NPCs like the Pikmin President and the Piantas in Mario Sunshine. This segment could have been really eye-opening for somebody looking into character and graphic design as a career. They really go into detail where they went to school and what led them to get their job at Nintendo. I think it's just great to see someone who isn't in a major directorial position get to speak about their experiences too. I think we can skim through the next few issues here. At this point, Twilight Princess was actually delayed to March of 2006. Obviously, the Nintendo Power writers had to get a bit defensive here and tried to defer people to Fire Emblem and Mario Kart DS. Thankfully, the delay didn't change the fact that we were still getting great Inside Zelda articles. Some other Inside Zeldas would go into designers that worked on animation for Link and the process behind that. Keisuke Nishimori actually was doing a lot of the motion capture himself, and studied horseback riding to get the animation just right. The HD version years later would end up speeding up a lot of these super realistic animations they had done. They also specifically mentioned that he likes to snowboard and that it won't be in the game, but it did end up being in the game anyway. I wonder if he was hiding that fact or if he genuinely didn't know at this point. Inside Zelda would cover the cinematic directors, environment artists, and even fishing. One article offhandedly mentioned that Ganon would return after all, and they moved on into the 200th issue as the Wii got closer and closer. Where Nintendo Power wouldn't go into detail on things, the rumor mills would fill, with things like the Revolution controller being compatible with Zelda, or discussions and rumors about where it took place in the timeline. At this point, I think most people online were saying that Zelda was either going to be ported to the Wii, or at least highlight the Wii's backwards compatibility in some way. By issue 203, Nintendo Power would quietly retire the little blurbs that they put for the Most Wanted section, probably because they just had nothing left to say at this point. Either way, people would just have to sit, speculate, and wait for more news at E3 that year. At the time, the second to last GameCube game was published by Nintendo, which was that weird pinball game called Odama that most people don't really remember. The last game Nintendo published for the Cube would be Zelda.
But if all you want is next generation, you're in the wrong place. Because what you'll see from Nintendo is not just next. It's what's absolutely new.
Issue 205 was the first issue with the Wii, the official name for their evolution, and the lead into the final release date for Twilight Princess. Zelda would be announced as a double release with the Wii version available at launch, with the GameCube version following a few months later, but that wasn't detailed yet. This issue was more focused on the Wii itself and Wii-specific stuff. We also got the announcement for Smash Bros. Brawl at the time, which would pretty much fill Zelda's slot in the hype cycle immediately following Twilight Princess. There's a bit here about Phantom Hourglass, which I think was the third Zelda game we got since the announcement of Twilight Princess. At the end, they threw us a bone with a small section about the new controls. As it goes with print media, we just had to wait a little bit longer for that E3 info. Twilight Princess update. Finally, there's this huge dump for Zelda news, and it was pretty easy to see that the game was practically done at this point. The demo at E3 would be focused on the Goron mines and the fishing hole. The most notable thing I think is that Link is actually left-handed still. On the Wii version, they made Link right-handed and flipped the entire world map to make it work with the new control. Since most people are right-handed, they figured the Wii Remote should be your sword. In the E3 demo, B seems to still be used to attack, so things were still pretty up in the air. Nintendo Power mentions flicking the Wii Remote to do a shield bash, which got flipped around with the rest of the game at release. The claw shot was also in your inventory and could access some extra rupees in parts of the dungeon. Game demos are usually made months in advance, but it makes me wonder how late the world flipping was implemented. Inside Zelda would call it a wrap after 15 months of developer interviews. The last one would follow Daiji Imai, game director and production manager. They talk about the process over the last few years, and I think it's a fitting piece to wrap up the series. The game and the Wii were coming up fast, so Nintendo Power would just run some top 5 listicles on random Zelda stuff. It's pretty fun to read the top 10s and that sort of thing from years ago, to get an idea of what sorts of things people favored at the time. In terms of top 5 supporting characters in Zelda, Midna from Twilight Princess is probably considered one of the best now. The hype cycle of Twilight Princess is also the story of the end of the GameCube. By November 2006, the Wii launched and knocked the GameCube out of whatever shred of spotlight it still had. Issue 209 would feature a few more top 5s, but would also be the last time Twilight Princess and the GameCube were in the Most Wanted section. The new generation had officially started. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess would finally launch on November 19th, 2006 for the Wii. long section reviewing and hyping up Twilight Princess, though, was awesome. There's loads of screenshots of the final game, and some really cool coverage, with one small strange detail. This magic bar. It's mysteriously in all pre-release footage and images, and the thing is even on the back of the Wii version's box. I didn't really think about it at the time, but when the game came out, there was no magic, despite it being in all this footage. It doesn't look like the meter even worked, since in all the footage I see, it's halfway full. I don't know if it was ever explained what it was supposed to do, but I assume it would have been used for the magic armor or maybe Wolf Link's abilities. Nowadays, though, it's more an example of how tight Twilight Princess's development was all the way to the end. I didn't really talk about it too much, but almost every Inside Zelda article talks about how they really haven't left the office that much. Nobody on the team was really taking any vacations, and they were all working incredibly hard to get this game done. Crunch isn't really something that we should accept as a thing, but I do respect these guys a lot for pulling it through. With the announcement of the game on May 11th, 2004, it was a 922-day wait, just over 2.5 years. 945 days for me. My family didn't get a Wii until a year or two later, so we waited for the GameCube version we pre-ordered forever ago. We got the game, and I'll never forget throwing it on our biggest CRT in the house to see the game in action for the first time. For us, it was worth the wait. Link being left-handed and the consistency of the map to Ocarina of Time in the GameCube version meant to us that it was intended as the proper version of Twilight Princess. It's still one of my favorite games in the series, even with its weird tonal shifts and gimmicky items. Zelda would soon shift back to the tone and the direction that the developers wanted in the first place, moving away from the Lord of the Rings-esque art direction, since that was really a response to Western fans' complaints with Wind Waker. But I still think Twilight Princess stands up, and its overly serious vibes just give it a unique appeal as the years have gone on. Hype cycles are sorta silly, like obviously I wasn't excitedly waiting for Zelda for 2 years straight and doing nothing else, but it was fun to ride that wave while it was still going. Like I mentioned before, most Nintendo fans would hop from the Zelda train to the Brawl train and get ready for another hype cycle in the next few years. Breath of the Wild on Wii U and Switch would follow a real similar trajectory years later, and its development took even longer. It's sort of what Zelda is known for at this point. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. This has sort of been an idea I've had for a while now, and I hope it was entertaining enough. I really love looking back through the old Nintendo Power issues to see what things I might have missed or forgot about. If you had a good time hanging out here, I'd appreciate a like or a comment below, as that always helps support the channel. I'd love to hear your own stories about the build-up toward Twilight Princess, or maybe just different hype cycles in general. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, be sure to subscribe too. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video, and we'll see you in 2025.